Welcome back to AI Takeover, everyone. I'm really excited about today's deep dive because we're looking at something that I think is on everyone's mind, as AI gets more and more powerful and kind of out there in the world. It's the question of ethical AI. And you guys sent in some awesome stuff from criticallycurious.com. We've got PixelPia's piece, Ethical AI, Can Machines Ever Be Truly Fair? And then Sven's article, The Myth of the Ethical Machine. And he's got a little bit more of a, let's say, a skeptical take on things.
Yeah, he does.
So we're going to unpack these two perspectives.
Absolutely.
And see what they mean for this whole AI landscape that we're all trying to navigate.
Yeah, what's so fascinating is right off the bat, you see this contrast in their approach. PixelPia is really diving into those, like almost practical challenges of making AI ethical. It's like she's out there mapping the road ahead, identifying all the, the potholes and the detours. But Sven, on the other hand, he's kind of taking a step back and questioning if we're even using the right map, Like, is this destination of truly fair AI something we can even reach? Or, do we even really understand what that looks like? I mean, it's a great question.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
So as the learner, we've got these two voices, and our mission today is to really wrap our heads around those core ethical challenges that AI is presenting, at least as PixelPia and Sven see them. But where do they agree? Where do they disagree?
Yeah.
And ultimately, what's our takeaway? Is aiming for this perfectly fair AI a realistic goal? Or is it, maybe a bit of a fantasy? And so PixelPia jumps right into this, by stating something pretty fundamental. She's saying that AI doesn't have its own sense of morality or anything. It's just a tool that reflects how we build it and how we train it.
Yeah, and that's such an important foundation for this entire discussion. She's basically saying, look, AI is operating based on the instructions we give it and the data we feed it. It doesn't have its own internal compass of right and wrong. So when we're talking about ethical AI, what we're really talking about is the ethics of the humans who are creating and deploying it.
Right.
And Sven echoes that point, but with a bit more of a provocative edge. He says AI is just picking up on patterns in the data we give it. And that includes all of our inconsistencies and our biases. He even calls it our nonsense, which I love.
Yeah.
So that kind of makes you wonder, right? Are we asking a machine that's been trained on data from a world that isn't always fair to somehow magically become this paragon of fairness?
Yeah.
It's like, come on, guys.
Yeah.
It's not that simple. And that difference in their tone really sets the stage for the whole conversation.
Right. Okay, so PixelPia lays out this problem of, AI not having this inherent sense of right and wrong.
Yeah.
And then she gets into the specifics, right? She talks about the different ethical challenges that AI throws at us. And she starts with probably the biggest one, bias and fairness.
Yeah, it's a big one. It's probably the most talked about issue in AI ethics. And PixelPia does a great job of clearly defining AI bias. She explains how these systems can end up unfairly favoring or disadvantaging certain groups. And then she breaks it down even further by looking at, the sources of that bias.
Right.
So you've got data bias, which is when the information that the AI is learning from is already skewed or reflects existing prejudices in society. Then there's algorithmic bias. This can happen through flaws in the design of the AI itself. And then finally, you have human bias, which is, either intentionally or unintentionally introduced by the developers who are building these systems.
Right, and she doesn't just keep it theoretical either. She gives these really concrete examples of how this can play out in the real world and mess things up.
Oh, absolutely. She brings it home with those real-world consequences. She talks about how in hiring, AI could unfairly favor certain demographics if it's trained on historical data where those groups were overrepresented, even if those candidates aren't necessarily the most qualified. And then in criminal justice, she points to these predictive policing algorithms that might lead to over-policing of minority communities because they're trained on biased crime data. And then you have the healthcare example. AI models that haven't been trained on data that's representative of different demographics could lead to, misdiagnoses or treatments that aren't as effective for certain populations. It's like a domino effect, right?
Yeah.
These biases can cascade into these really tangible and unfair outcomes.
And Sven kind of jumps in on that point with that example of facial recognition AI.
Oh, yeah, that was a really powerful one. He talks about how these facial recognition systems have often been trained on data sets that are predominantly made up of images of, lighter-skinned individuals.
Right.
And as a result, they've struggled to accurately identify people with darker skin tones. And what I think is really interesting is his observation that instead of immediately addressing that biased training data, the initial reaction was often to kind of blame the AI itself, as if the technology was inherently flawed rather than being a reflection of the flawed data it was given.
Right, right. it's easy to kind of point the finger at the machine.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
not look at ourselves in the mirror.
Right. It's like we want to project our own problems onto the technology and say, oh, well, the AI is racist.
Right.
But it's really reflecting the biases that we've put into it.
Okay, so now we've got this problem of bias laid out pretty clearly. PixelPia then turns to thinking about, what can we actually do about this? What are some strategies for making AI fairer?
Yeah, she gets a little bit more optimistic in this section and starts exploring solutions. She emphasizes the need for diverse and representative data sets to train these AI systems in the first place.
Right.
You can't expect fair outcomes if the data you're feeding the AI is already biased. And then she talks about designing algorithms that are as transparent as possible so we can understand how they're making decisions. No more black boxes. We need to be able to see what's going on under the hood. And then she talks about the importance of having diverse teams developing these systems, people from different backgrounds with different perspectives. And then finally, she stresses the importance of continuous monitoring. We need to be watching these systems in the real world to catch and correct any unintended biases that might emerge.
Right. And then just when you think we're getting somewhere, Sven throws in this super interesting thought experiment that kind of, throws a wrench in the whole thing. He talks about training an AI with absolutely no human bias, like zero.
Oh yeah, that's where things get really interesting. And this part is kind of mind-blowing. He's saying, okay, imagine we actually achieve that. We have this AI that's completely free of all of the baggage and biases that we humans carry around. His argument is that we might actually find the AI's decisions unacceptable because they would challenge the power structures that we're so used to. So for example, he suggests that a truly unbiased AI might recommend hiring fewer men in certain fields to address historical imbalances. Or it might prioritize resources for marginalized communities in a way that those who are currently in positions of power might see as unfair.
Oh, that's so uncomfortable to think about. But it's so important, right? I mean, he's asking this question. Do we actually want truly fair AI if it means shaking up the way things have always been? Do we even know what that looks like?
Right. It challenges our definition of fairness. Are we truly committed to equality, or are we more comfortable with an AI that just reinforces the systems that benefit certain groups, even if those systems are fundamentally flawed?
Yep.
It's a great question to ponder.
It really is. So moving on from that very thorny issue, PixelPia tackles this next big challenge, which is transparency and explainability. And she kind of frames this as, this whole black box problem.
No, this is huge, and it's only going to get bigger as AI gets more sophisticated. A lot of these advanced AI systems, especially those complex models like deep neural networks, they kind of operate in this opaque way. Even the developers who built them might not fully understand the exact reasoning behind every single decision the AI makes.
Right, it's like this magic box that spits out answers.
Yeah, exactly. And she asks this really fundamental question. If an AI makes a decision that significantly impacts someone's life, like rejecting a job application or giving a medical diagnosis, shouldn't that person have a right to understand why that decision was made?
Right. It only seems fair.
Exactly. And she introduces this idea of explainable AI, or XAI, as a potential solution. It's basically this growing field that's focused on developing techniques to help us understand and interpret the decisions made by AI systems. The goal is to make that reasoning process more transparent, which could lead to greater trust in these systems and make it easier to hold them accountable. But as she points out, there's often a trade-off here. The AI models that are the most accurate are often the least transparent, and vice versa. Finding that sweet spot, that balance, is really tough.
Okay, now Sven doesn't really talk about transparency directly in his piece, but that whole skepticism he has about achieving true fairness seems to suggest that maybe we shouldn't be putting all our trust in these black boxes anyway.
Yeah, I think that's a fair interpretation. If we don't even really know what fair means, how can we be confident that a black box AI is making ethical choices? It's like giving someone a loaded gun and saying, okay, just point it in a safe direction. You don't know what's going to happen.
Okay, so next up, PixelPia jumps into something that I think is really, really relevant to all of our lives, which is this whole issue of privacy and surveillance in the age of AI.
Yeah, this is one that hits close to home for everybody. PixelPia points out that AI really thrives on data, right? And we're generating huge amounts of data all the time through our online activity and just our daily lives.
Right.
She's concerned about the lack of true informed consent in a lot of these data collection practices. Users might not really understand how their data is being used or shared. And there's always the potential for data misuse, where information that was collected for one purpose gets repurposed for something completely different that people never agreed to.
Yeah, I hadn't thought about that.
It's a slippery slope. And then, of course, there's the whole issue of AI-powered surveillance.
Right.
She talks about how these technologies are being increasingly deployed in public spaces and even in the workplace.
Oh, yeah, like facial recognition and all that.
Exactly. It raises all these concerns about constant monitoring and the erosion of our privacy. And while Sven doesn't explicitly talk about privacy, his point that AI just learns from the data we give it is really important here. A lot of these surveillance systems are being trained on data that might itself reflect biases or unethical data collection practices, which means they could potentially lead to unfair or discriminatory outcomes.
Right, like garbage in, garbage out.
Exactly. You can't expect a system to be fair if the data it's learning from is already tainted.
Okay, so this next area PixelPia gets into is AI and autonomy. And I think this really gets to the heart of that question of responsibility. Like, who takes the blame when AI makes a mistake?
Yeah, it's tricky because with increasing autonomy comes this diffusion of responsibility. PixelPia uses that classic self-driving car example.
Yeah.
Imagine a self-driving car gets into an unavoidable accident. Who's at fault? Is it the manufacturer of the car, the human who was supposedly in control, or is it the AI system itself?
Right. It's hard to say.
Yeah, it's a really tough question. And this issue extends way beyond self-driving cars. She talks about how AI is gaining autonomy in healthcare, in criminal justice, in automated hiring. It's everywhere. And our legal and ethical frameworks are having a really hard time keeping up.
Right. And Sven's point that AI is basically just following patterns and doesn't have its own intentions or understanding really adds another layer of complexity to this whole question of blame.
Yeah, because if AI is just mimicking patterns based on the data it's given, can we really say it's making a conscious decision? And if it's not making a conscious decision, can we really hold it accountable?
Right. It's almost like holding a calculator responsible for a math error. It's just doing what it's programmed to do.
Exactly. And that's what makes this whole issue of AI and autonomy so challenging. It forces us to rethink our traditional notions of responsibility.
Right. And then PixelPia gets into something that I think a lot of people are really worried about, which is the impact of AI on human jobs.
Yeah, job displacement is a huge concern, and rightfully so. PixelPia acknowledges that as AI-powered automation gets more sophisticated, we're likely to see some job losses, especially in sectors that involve a lot of repetitive or manual tasks. But she also points out that AI could lead to the creation of new types of jobs and transform existing roles, which means that workers will need to adapt and develop new skills.
Right.
And she brings up this really important point about income inequality. If the benefits of AI aren't distributed fairly, we could see this widening gap between the haves and have-nots. And then she touches on something that I think is fascinating, which is the whole question of AI-generated content and intellectual property. Things like copyright and authorship. Who owns the rights to content that's created by a machine?
It's such a weird new world.
It is. It's forcing us to rethink a lot of our assumptions.
Yeah. And then there's this super relevant issue that PixelPia talks about, which is AI and misinformation. I mean, this feels like it's everywhere these days.
Yeah, it's one of the most pressing challenges of our time. PixelPia highlights the danger of AI being used to create and spread misinformation at a scale that we've never seen before.
Yeah, it's kind of terrifying.
It is. She talks about deepfakes, those AI-generated videos or audio that can convincingly mimic real people.
Oh, yeah. Those are scary.
Yeah, it's like something out of a sci-fi movie, but it's real. And these can be used to damage reputations, manipulate public opinion, commit fraud. It's a real threat. And then there's the whole issue of AI being used to generate and spread fake news articles and social media posts. And Sven's idea that AI can copy nonsense at scale is so relevant here. Misinformation is like a virus, and AI can help it spread like wildfire.
Right. So what do we do about it? I mean, it feels so overwhelming.
Well, PixelPia talks about the need for a multi-pronged approach. We need to be developing better tools to detect deepfakes and other forms of AI-generated misinformation. We need to be improving media literacy among the public so people can be more discerning about what they see and read online.
Yeah, we all have to do our part.
Absolutely. And then there's the question of regulation. Can we or should we regulate the use of AI in ways that might prevent the spread of harmful misinformation without stifling innovation? That's a delicate balance.
Right. Okay, and then finally, PixelPia zooms in on a very specific area, which is the use of AI in criminal justice. And this feels like an area with really, really high stakes.
Oh, yeah, without a doubt. She looks at several different ways that AI is being used in the criminal justice system. There's predictive policing, where algorithms try to predict where crimes are likely to occur. There are risk assessment tools, which try to predict the likelihood of an individual reoffending. And then there are all these different forms of AI-powered surveillance. And she reiterates those concerns about algorithmic bias and predictive policing. You know, if those algorithms are trained on historical crime data that's already biased, it can lead to this feedback loop of over-policing in certain communities.
Right.
And that just reinforces existing inequalities. She also talks about the lack of transparency in these algorithms and how they might erode human judgment in law enforcement. And when it comes to risk assessment tools, she's concerned about the quality of the data they use, the lack of due process for individuals who are being assessed by these systems, and the potential for perpetuating societal biases. And then, of course, there are all the ethical implications of AI-powered surveillance, you know, privacy violations and the potential for misidentification.
Like a can of worms.
It is. And it's not an easy can to close once it's open.
So as she kind of wraps things up, PixelPia circles back to that point she made at the beginning that AI is ultimately a reflection of us.
Right.
For better or for worse.
Yeah, she really drives that point home.
Right.
She says that achieving ethical AI isn't a one-time fix. It's an ongoing process that requires our constant attention. We have to be vigilant about transparency, fairness, and accountability. And she leaves us with those really tough questions that we were talking about earlier. Can we design AI to be truly fair and unbiased? And if we can, are we willing to trust it with those high-stakes decisions?
Yeah. And Sven also ends on a really thought-provoking note. He says AI is only ever going to be as fair as the data it's trained on. And if we're feeding it data from an unfair world, guess what? It's going to produce unfair results. So his final thought is this. If we really want fair AI, we need to start by creating a fairer world.
He's got a point.
Right. I mean, it's almost like saying you can't just fix the algorithm. You have to fix the underlying societal problems, too.
Right. It's like trying to build a house on a foundation of sand.
Exactly. So, wow, I feel like this deep dive into PixelPia and Stan's perspectives on ethical AI has given us so much to think about, especially as AI becomes more and more integrated into every aspect of our lives.
Yeah, it's been a really rich conversation. PixelPia gives us this detailed and structured overview of the key ethical challenges and kind of points us towards some potential solutions. She's very much focused on our responsibility to guide the development of AI in a positive direction. And then Sven comes in with that, more critical, almost philosophical perspective, challenging our assumptions and pushing us to think about the bigger picture.
And as a learner, you've gotten this concentrated dose of information about the really big issues. We talked about the challenge of bias. How do we make these systems transparent? The implications for privacy and surveillance, the question of accountability, and who takes the blame when things go wrong. We talked about the impact on jobs and the spread of misinformation, and the really sensitive area of AI in criminal justice. And what I think is clear from both these authors is that AI is this powerful mirror reflecting both our best intentions and our worst failings.
And what's great is that PixelPia leaves us with those open questions, right? Can AI truly be fair? Can we trust it with important decisions? And Sven really pushes us to examine our own motivations. Do we even want a truly fair AI? Or are we just looking for a system that makes our existing biases look a little bit better? Those are really tough questions that we all need to be asking ourselves.
Absolutely. And as PixelPia herself says, this is really just the tip of the iceberg. She provides some fantastic links to additional resources in her piece, and we definitely encourage you to check those out.
Yeah, do some more digging. Think critically about the arguments that both PixelPia and Sven are presenting. What resonates with you? What leaves you scratching your head? And here's a final thought to chew on. If AI is really just a reflection of our data and our values, what does the current state of AI tell us about ourselves? And what do we need to change about the world we live in to create a more ethical and equitable AI future?
So much to think about. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.
Yeah, it's been a great conversation.
And we'll see you next time on AI Takeover.